Energy Media readers, we're going to be talking about a bit of a difficult problem today, and that is the decision by the Alberta and BC governments to cull wolves in an effort to bring back endangered herds of caribou. The problem is that the wolves are being poisoned and shot from helicopters in Alberta. Poison is not used in BC, but it is, but they are shot from helicopters, and so there, a lot of environmentalists and nature lovers are kind of upset about this. So to chat about it, we're going to talk to Eric Denhoff, who is the Deputy Minister for Environment and Climate Change in the Alberta government up to 2019, and was involved in these discussions. So welcome to the interview, Eric.
Thanks very much, Markham.
Now, look, this is a difficult problem. It's if you want to have more caribou, you have less wolves, and why can't we get a win-win out of this? Give me a little background to the issue and some of the discussions that you had while you were in the Alberta government.
Sure. I mean, it is a terrible problem in parts of Canada, particularly. Overall, caribou are threatened across Canada. There are some herds in parts of BC and parts of Alberta that will be extirpated. They'll be gone in a matter of years, short number of years, if interventions aren't made. And there's one or two herds that we've lost already. So the question becomes, what are the best mechanisms to protect them? The federal government has extraordinary powers under federal legislation to order the habitat to be protected for caribou. And they've done that with, sage grouse in southern Alberta, where they froze, a large portion of land in southern Alberta. And so people began in Alberta and BC quite a few years ago to look at what could be done to protect caribou. And there are a series of challenges. One is the economic cost of doing so. In some circumstances, there was modeling done that it would cost you, $1 million a caribou, $500,000 a caribou to protect them. At a certain point, I don't know what that number is, society sort of will rebel and say, well, that's just too much. The second problem is that the reasons caribou are declining are numerous, and we're not sure we even know all of them. So some of them are the oil and gas activity creating these large cut lines, forestry activity, some climate change affecting the habitat, food supply for caribou. And so it's become, yes, a series of trade-offs. If you have a lot of wolves, and they're not particularly threatened, in fact, they're expanding their population, and a declining number of caribou where they're threatened with extinction, in recent years, the trade-off has been we're going to have to kill some wolves in order to protect caribou until we can divine a way for long-term preservation of caribou.
Is there efforts underway to come up with some kind of a longer-term strategy to help the caribou herds recover that doesn't include killing off wolves?
So there are a number of activities. The first is Canada has required all the provinces to come up with caribou protection strategies, and they generally involve an insistence that governments preserve half or 2/3 of the traditional caribou habitat by herd. The second thing Alberta attempted was the beginning of a very accelerated replanting of these oil and gas cut lines, seismic lines, and forestry roads, abandoned forestry roads and oil and gas roads, that sort of thing, in order to create barriers for the wolves to move down these lines, which have become sort of highways for the wolves into caribou area where the wolves didn't traditionally go hunt. They used to just hunt moose and other game in other areas. The third is an experiment, a small one's taking place in BC. A larger one has been discussed for Alberta, of a large penning exercise where you would protect maternal caribou and their offspring for 3 months, 6 months, a year from wolf predation and other predators, and a host of other ideas like that. And then finally, there are wolf control mechanisms, and as you touched on, some of them have involved poison, which has a bycatch of things like cougars and bears and birds, which is not good. Aerial shooting, helicopters typically, and trapping, and sometimes hunting with bounties and that sort of thing on wolves. Wolves are pretty smart. They're not easy to kill, and they've expanded fairly rapidly in some parts of Alberta and BC. Their population's increased, oddly enough. And if you're not careful in the way you eliminate wolves from a pack, they can end up actually doubling their size by splitting off and forming a new pack and that sort of thing if you don't take out the whole pack. So it's scientifically quite complicated beyond my my understanding. And in terms of policy and in terms of politics, it's very complicated.
How much of the inability to reach some kind of a middle ground compromise where the wolves are not being poisoned and shot is due to inertia? You know, we've done it this way for a long time. I know I've heard this from wolf advocates. They say, you know, yes, okay, fine, we understand some of these issues, but industry in particular takes the attitude that this isn't, you know, okay, we've done it this way. We really don't want to get it too far outside the box. What's your take on that?
I think there are several problems. One is industries argued that we don't know what's killing off the caribou, and that you could preserve all this land and you could kill all these wolves and you might still lose caribou herds, and that's a possibility. Second, the protection of these caribou habitat areas, large areas, inevitably leads to either a freezing or a lowering of the number of jobs in forestry and oil and gas predominant activities. And then third, there are a large group of people who just think the caribou aren't worth saving, and so why bother shooting these wolves? You're not going to save these very at-risk caribou herds like Little Smoky Alapesh or some of the ones that are down to 30 or 40 caribou. But I think, you know, most groups would say if wolf control can be practiced for a short period of time and it would allow recovery of the caribou species, they might tolerate it. The challenge is caribou being hunted or wolves being hunted and controlled for decades to come, I think is really difficult for animal activists particularly. Yeah.
Final question. Are you optimistic that we will at some point resolve this, you know, come up with a better solution, or is this going to be an ongoing rancorous debate?
Yeah, I'm really concerned. You know, there are a few areas like the Mikisew Cree in northeastern Alberta who have worked with the industry and the Alberta government to preserve a very large tract of caribou habitat. The BC government's made a very successful move to preserve some caribou habitat. But overall, I think particularly in a recessionary economy, oil and gas and the forest industry don't have anything to give in their view in terms of helping contribute financially. People are very worried about further job losses the caribou habitat protection would require. And I think we're going to lose a number of herds over the next decade. Actually, I think we'll lose quite a few in Alberta and BC. It's a bit different in Ontario and Quebec. We have very large herds in some cases that can, you know, probably survive a bit longer. But no, I'm not particularly optimistic with a few exceptions in Alberta and BC that we will in fact be able to preserve some of the most threatened herds. Yeah. I think they're done.
Sorry to hear that, and we'll follow this story, and hopefully maybe a little public pressure might change things a bit. We hope.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much for this, Eric.
Not at all. Okay.